must boost humanitarian aid into Gaza within 30 days or risk losing weapons funding. A letter has been sent from Washington to the Israeli government. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council has expressed strong concern that peacekeepers were wounded by Israeli attacks in southern Lebanon. Michel Alou, Secretary-General of Lebanon's National Bloc, told LBC a ceasefire is needed.
To be able to rebuild behind the state and institutions only, and to make sure that Hezbollah becomes a normal party and not a military organization dependent on Iran, and then to rebuild altogether and to have this national unity allowing us to maintain our society.
The Old Baileys heard how 10-year-old Sarah Sharif wore a hijab to hide facial injuries she suffered in the years prior to her death. 3 members of her family, including her father, deny murder in Woking in Surrey in August last year. A man's been arrested on suspicion of murder after the second shooting in London in 3 days. A man in his 40s died at the scene in Tottenham this morning. And Thomas Tuchel has agreed to become England's new manager. It's understood the former Bayern Munich boss has already signed his contract. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 43 points at 82.49. The pound buys $1.30 and €1.20. LBC weather: rain developing across western and northern areas tonight. Heavy at times and a low of 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. Joining me on the panel tonight are the newly released former Conservative MP, Dame Andrea Leadsom.
Yes.
Do you feel that you've rediscovered your freedom?
Yeah, definitely.
And Dr. Jeevun Sandher has just been taken captive by the House of Commons. He is the newly elected Labour MP for Loughborough. Welcome back to you, Jeevun.
Great to be here.
And to my right, we have 2 debutantes. We have McGee, a journalist who specialises in European diplomacy and security, and James Reed, businessman, who's the chairman and chief executive of the employment agency Reed. Welcome to both of you as well. Well, let's tell you how you can get in touch with us. The phones are back, ladies and gentlemen. Who'd have thought? 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number, and you can text 84850. And of course, we'd love you to watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, well, let's go to our first caller. It's Howard in Greenford. Howard, what would you like to ask?
Right, good evening, panel. Is America ready for a female president?
Well, Donald Trump seems to be now rather ahead in the polls and indeed on the betting markets. Andrea Leadsom.
I mean, I'm astonished that Trump is so ahead. I just think the American people have been there once before, and I find it quite extraordinary. And I also find it extraordinary that Howard is asking that question because, a female president is a president, and actually women can do everything that men can do and considerably better. And there wouldn't be any men if women didn't give birth to them. So I actually just think, let's grow up and have a sensible conversation. In the UK, we've managed female prime ministers. Note, Labour have never managed a female leader, but Labour haven't managed a lot of things.
Yeah, but only one of them was any good.
What, in the UK?
Yeah.
Well, that is a longer discussion, but is America ready? They certainly should be.
I mean, Jeevun, it is quite insulting in a way to even ask the question, isn't it? Because I remember when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, there weren't people who actually said, "Is Britain ready for an Asian Prime Minister?" And there was very little comment about the fact that he was the first non-white Prime Minister. People say, "Well, is Britain ready for a black Prime Minister or a gay Prime Minister or whatever?" Have we not gotten past that?
Yeah, I'm not sure what ready means, right? Someone wins the election and then they become the Prime Minister or the President. Hillary Clinton did win the most votes in the 2016 election. I think at this point in time, Kamala's just slightly ahead in the popular vote, but obviously we'll see what will happen in the swing states. I'm not sure what ready means. I do know that Kamala Harris could be a great president if she is elected.
James Reed, let's translate this into your area of operations. I mean, if one of your clients was saying, "Well, I'm not sure whether we're ready for a female chief executive yet," I mean, what would you say to them?
Well, I'd have a big problem with that. And
thank goodness for that.
They would be breaking the law, and that would be a serious issue. I think the American question, of course, they're ready, because when there's a female president, they'll find that it's a success. So I don't see why this needs to be about gender at all. It's about the qualities of the person. And when you're looking for a chief exec or a president or a prime minister, it's the qualities of the person that you should be seeking to evaluate.
And when I was watching that debate with Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump, I mean, she certainly more than held her own. In fact, she trumped Trump, I thought, in that debate. So if you're worried about sort of capabilities, I think she proved herself just on that night.
Well, she wasn't pushed around by him, was she?
No.
If anything, it was the other way round. And I suppose if you're electing a president, one thought is, well, you've got Vladimir Putin or the Chinese to consider, and will she do a good job in confronting and dealing with them? I saw evidence that absolutely she could.
Luke McGee.
When you say, is America ready for a female president, the answer I would give is, I really hope so. And what I mean by that isn't necessarily that I do actually hope she wins, but it isn't necessarily that. It's that if her losing leads to division in that country, the most dangerous thing that can happen after this election is the idea that it's contested or that people don't recognise her as the president. And if the reason that they don't recognise her as an appropriate president is because she's female, then we're in a really difficult position. What does that say about America as a society? So I think America probably is ready for a female president, but it's quite a worrying question, really, if that is a question mark.
I suppose if you think back to when we were having this discussion in Britain in the late 1970s, there was a question mark over whether the country was ready for a female prime minister. And I remember the day before, I think it was the day before that, before the 79 election, Margaret Thatcher, in her final election broadcast, had to do one straight to camera saying, look, I recognise that some of you are worried about the fact that I'm a woman. Well, let me tell you. And then she went on to sort of explain it. But there will still be a bit of that in America, won't there? Because often it's actually female voters who are the problem here, in that you look at Conservative selection committees, well, it's often the women who prevent women being selected, Andrea.
Yeah, now that is a huge, grave disappointment when that does occur, but in my experience, much, much less so recently. And when you look at the track record of Margaret Thatcher, I would say, apart from Churchill, she's the best Prime Minister we ever had. She turned the country around. She gave hope to people. She privatised these industries that were absolutely broken and disastrous. And you see what Labour's determined to do now is to renationalise them. So we're going to sort of see again why Margaret Thatcher did such a brilliant job back in the day. And we have a fantastic story to tell as a Conservative Party and as a government about the equality in our ranks. And so, I just think people should look, exactly as James says, at the quality of the individual and give them a chance, and should not, you should be colourblind, sexuality blind, but absolutely gender blind. Women make up slightly more than half the world's population, I believe.
Okay, anybody else, or should we move on to another question?
I was just going to quickly say, because you mentioned some of our previous female prime ministers, and I would actually disagree, and I think that history will reflect on Theresa May rather differently. But at that very difficult moment when you were obviously her rival, and people may look back at that now and look at particular things, but actually that leadership contest was very, very civilised, and I think I think women do go about politics in a different way, and at a really difficult time for the country. You compare that to the 2019 leadership contest, and it was a very civilised, mature debate. So that's all I have to say on that.
Okay, right. Well, let's move on to. Thank you, Howard. Let's move on to Simi, who's in Wanstead. Hello, Simi.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
Hiya.
What's your question?
I have two, really. One is, how obese or how overweight do you have to be before you would qualify for this injection? And my second part is really, how easily accessible is this for weight loss?
Well, this is Wes Streeting's announcement today, the Health Secretary, that they want to give obese, unemployed people the Ozempic weight loss jab in order to encourage people back into the workplace. There are so many questions that, we've been talking about this in the last hour. So many questions arise from this. Let's go to our very svelte-like panel in the studio. Jeevun, Sandher, let me come to you first, because I posed the question at the beginning of the last hour that if this had been proposed by a Conservative government, I suspect the reaction of the Labour opposition would be to say, what on earth are you doing? You are stigmatising overweight people.
This isn't about stigma, it's about our health, right? It was like the Darzi review that we had. We know that what the problem in this country is chronic health conditions. So as we've become older as a population, we're also finding those things that costing our NHS and making us more sick. Now, we are investing in prevention over cure. We are investing in community care, and actually encouraging people to lose weight is good for them. It's good for the country. It's good for our bottom line. It's part of making this country the healthiest it can be. Look, the last time we were in government, the lowest waiting list in history. NHS, the envy of the world. Clearly, this point in time, the highest waiting list in history. You can't get a GP appointment. Anything that helps people to be healthier means less people go in the GP. It means that those of you at home call at 8 a.m.
That's fine.
Can get their appointment. If
you were saying to anybody who is clinically obese, we are going to pay for you to have this jab, that's one thing. But this is sort of just for unemployed people to get them off the unemployment list back into the workplace. And I completely accept we need to get people. There are too many people who are sort of long-term unemployed, and we need to try and find innovative ways of getting them back into the workplace, but not by stigmatising them.
This is about helping people become healthier, right? And I absolutely used to believe and support that. I think everyone here wants to be a bit healthier. Everyone's eating a bit better, exercising a bit more. As a government, we're unafraid of saying we want this population to be healthy. I want my constituents to be healthy. And anything we can do as a government to help them, absolutely, we're going to do it.
So when you saw this announcement, you didn't wasn't your immediate reaction wasn't the same as mine, which was essentially WTF?
No, because we've known about Ozempic for a while. It's had very beneficial effects. Of course, I think one of the Conservative leadership candidates has been taking Ozempic for a while, is contending at this point in time. Anything can help people be healthier is the way I look at these things. I look at ends rather than where we're getting it to.
James Reed, let's come to you on this again. I guess this has some sort of application in your business. I mean, the long-term unemployed problem, it is a problem. Is this the way to at least partially solve it?
Well, I was surprised when I heard this. And I think Ozempic really helps people who have weight issues. I know people have taken it and find it very helpful. I think if people want to take it and the NHS can support them in that, then that's great. But there are lots of other ways of helping people who are unemployed, and we've been helping people who are unemployed, our business Read in Partnership, for more than 25 years, get back into work. And a lot of these people are in the economically inactive category. There are over 9 million people in that category. So that's a lot of Ozempic. And I don't think that's going to be what's happening here.
But this is going to cost £280 million, apparently. But as I understand it, this is a drug that you go on for maybe 2 years. Then after that, you come off it, and the evidence is that you then put the weight back on. So you think, well, is that money wasted?
Well, it could be. And I don't think there's a long track record of this drug. It's relatively recent that it's become available. I mean, it seems to be a bit of a wonder drug. I mean, anything that helps people feel better, that's healthy for them, is good. I mean, I believe firmly that work helps people feel better, and getting to work is a big part of participating in society. And we can help people get back to work through traditional means, giving them an employment advisor who will sit with them and help them prepare a CV and prepare for a job interview. That doesn't involve injecting them with anything. If they want to be injected.
Well, we should make clear that these are not compulsory.
Yeah, well, I was wondering. I mean,
that really would be quite something, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would.
Luke?
Well, that was what I was really going to ask about, the compulsory nature of it, because you can say it's not compulsory, but then what happens to someone's benefits if they say they don't want to do it? To what extent is it then an incentive? I just think it's a very, very odd thing to bring someone's health into a growth agenda in this very sort of slightly odd way. And the second point is, you said wonder drug. I'm slightly concerned, as you say, there isn't a sort of long evidence base of what goes on with this drug, and there are some quite alarming side effects, particularly around bowel obstruction, which can be incredibly dangerous. So I think painting it as this kind of magic thing and people suddenly lose weight or get back into work and sort of wrapping it up in this idea about a growth agenda just seems really quite odd to me.
Well, Andrew Leadsom, it's going to be quite interesting to see what Robert Jenrick says about this, given that he's lost 4.5 stone as a result of being on it. Good idea? Worth considering?
Absolutely bonkers. For a start, a lot of people who, James points out, are unemployed or not working, not economically active, are not overweight. And there are plenty of overweight people who are working. So for a start, the Venn diagram simply doesn't work. Secondly, there isn't the supply of the drug. I was the Minister for Primary Care and Public Health before the general election, and we were looking at various ways, including weight loss apps, including some really good interventions, health interventions with people to enable them to assess themselves. We had the Pharmacy First, enabling people to go into pharmacies and get their blood pressure taken and to get themselves weighed and to get support for losing weight. And this whole idea that if you're unemployed, therefore you're fat and therefore you need to get injected with something, that is so rude, it's so stigmatising. Exactly as you said at the start, Ian, if we'd come up with that, Labour would have made such a big deal of it.
I'm told by a former Conservative SPAD that this paper had come across Minister's desk. I don't think it was actually the Department of Health, it was a different department.
I'm glad it didn't come across my desk, I can assure you.
Within about 30 seconds.
I mean, it is absolutely appalling. So imagine if you were somebody who was overweight and looking for a job. What are you to think now? I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. Or indeed, if you are overweight and working, what happens to you now? You're going to lose your job because clearly the government has made a link between being fat and not getting a job. I mean, it's just totally bizarre. They're two different tracks. It's a hateful, horrible thing to be doing. Exactly as others have said, there's no long-term evidence of side effects and what it does to you. There's also not the supply. There's a lot of constraints on the supply.
I mean, it's been presumably approved by NICE, so it must be safe.
I think
not as a cure for unemployment.
That is a bit much, isn't it, really?
Okay.
At the end of it all, what are we talking about? We are talking about helping people be healthier so that they can work, right? We're talking about health because at the moment they aren't, because population has become much sicker, Andrew. As everyone knows when they try and get their GP in the morning, everyone sees around them, as everyone's seen as life expectancy is stalled.
The unemployment issue is an
life expectancy falling in the poorest nations, in the poorest parts of this country.
You are
we are a very unhealthy part of this country.
In a hateful way.
And you were the health minister, you're right, but nothing you were doing was working. In fact, it's making the country worse.
That's not true. You need to stand that up. What we were doing was sorting out primary care, the primary care recovery plan. Pharmacy First is absolutely a game changer for primary care. People are able to access much greater support for their own health issues. There are huge problems with obesity in this country, as there are right across the developed world. But your government saying, right, the answer is we're going to jab you all because you're fat and lazy, that is absolutely disgusting behaviour.
I think the key word
as bad as cutting the winter fuel allowance.
The key word there was recovery. Primary care recovery, because you need recovery when you can't get a GP appointment at 8 a.m. You had to recover from 14 years of poor decisions that you were making.
Really,
and more broadly, absolutely, this country or this government is going to invest to make sure this country is healthier. I'm really proud of what this government has done or is doing. I'm really proud of what we did last time we were in government as well.
Just because you say that doesn't make it true. That is a hateful proposal to make, and it's completely unenforceable. You won't have the supply, you won't have the belief in it. All you'll do is make people who are already very unhappy with themselves much more unhappy.
We've got 90 seconds to calm down in the studio, but we'll be back with you with some more questions in just a moment. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
As a
Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Well, the programme's only 21 minutes old, and I feel as if I might have to step in and separate Jeevun and Andrea at some point over the next 39 minutes. You never know. We have James Reed with us from the Reed Employment Agency, Dame Andrea Leadsom, former Conservative Cabinet Minister. In the break, you were telling me you're not going to tell me who you're going to support in the leadership election, because... Do you want to explain why?
That was a little joke, okay?
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm. I've had an awful lot to do with leadership contests over the last 14 years. I thought I might sit this one out.
Okay.
If that's all right.
Well, if you must. Dr. Jeevun, Sandher, anybody? Do you have a preferred candidate in the Conservative leadership contest?
Oh no, I'm bored of this show now. It's like the final series of Game of Thrones. Like, it's all done. We've seen it so many times before. We might do it again in a couple of years. Whoever comes across, it's going to be the same old story, I suspect.
And Luke McGee, journalist who specialises in European diplomacy and security. Right, we have a text question from Jamie. What harm can it really do to ask employers to pay a bit more in national insurance contributions? Let's come to you, James, because you've been writing about this and one or two related issues today.
Yes, I have. I'm very worried about this. And the idea has been floated that employers' national insurance might be increased in the budget. And let's be very clear, employers' national insurance is a tax on jobs. And it's a tax on jobs that would come at a time when we've had 27 consecutive periods of declining vacancies. This is the government's own data, published this morning on the ONS. And at the same time, over the last quarter, 50,000 payroll jobs have gone, according to the ONS. So the labour market is under a lot of stress. Well, there are lots of reasons. I mean, the economy is flatlining, really.
And is being brilliantly talked down by its government.
Well, there's a lot of concern around what might be in the budget, and employers are worried about these new employment rights that are being introduced, 28 new rules. So there's a lot of reasons, including then interest rates and the cost of living. So this is not a good time, I would say, to introduce a tax on jobs or a greater tax on jobs. And I think, the government might regret doing that in a year or two if this labour market decline continues, as it looks like doing.
We should point out that the government haven't said they're going to do this. It's just being speculated about at the moment. And, of course, people are saying, well, it wasn't it was specific in the manifesto that national insurance would not rise. And yet they're saying, yeah, well, that was meant for employees, not employers. So there do seem some signs that they're going to do this. Now, Jeevun, I'm really glad we've got you on the panel today because you're a former Treasury civil servant. I mean, what James said there, I think is quite concerning because it's always been seen, national insurance, if you put that up for employers, it's always been seen as a tax on jobs. And if you're a high-growth government, why on earth would you do that?
Well, this is a government that's going to invest in this country. I can't comment on the individual decisions, obviously, because I don't know what they're going to be. I'm as excited to see what's in the budget as everybody else is. I am an economist. It is like Christmas for us.
Well, the rest of us are dreading it.
I mean, more broadly, this is a country, or rather a government that's going to invest in this country. And we clearly need a lot of investment, don't we? Right? When 3 million people are out of work because they can't get the health care.
So that's not the question. We're talking about national insurance.
And on that, we do need to invest to grow this country. I'm saying to you that growing a nation is not merely about tax rates. I used to work in Somaliland, as you know, Ian. Tax rates are almost 0%. Now, Goldman Sachs will not move into Somalia because actually a nation is more than just its tax rate. A nation is about what they are producing. And indeed, when you have a healthy workforce, you produce more. When you're in a situation where half of secondary schools don't have the maths teachers they need, actually investing so those kids learn more today, they earn more tomorrow. We invest in clean energy.
That's got nothing to do with the question. The question is about, what harm can it really do to ask employers to pay a bit more in national insurance? Now, James says that it would do harm. Do you think it would do harm?
And there's a whole set of range and decisions in a budget, right? Some of which raise revenue, some of which you're investing. And so actually you have to take the whole thing in the round. It doesn't help to look at individual decisions. It helps to look at the entire
It really does, because that's the question we've got. But I'm asking you, do you think that it would do any harm to ask employers to pay a bit more national insurance?
I think you have to
for someone who's a Treasury economist, you can answer that question.
But as a Treasury economist, I always look at the entire budget as a whole, right? I say, what is this entire budget doing? Where is the money going? And more broadly, I definitely can't comment upon hypotheticals because I've not seen the budget.
Well, you're not a government minister. You can comment on it because you're a backbench MP, and as an economist, you will have views on whether putting up national insurance means that would cost jobs.
And I am a backbench MP, a part of the United Labour team. We came into government after a huge amount of turmoil in this country, a huge amount of infighting amongst the opposition, 3 prime ministers in 5 years. We do make decisions as a team and we follow the decisions. So Rachel will make these decisions. I absolutely support her to make them.
Whatever she makes, even if you disagree with her,
what I won't do, you wouldn't have the mail boy making writing checks, right? You'd have the CEO of the senior
leadership team. But you're not a mail boy, you're an ex-Treasury official, you're an expert economist. I think it's entirely reasonable to ask you, as an economist, what you think the effects of putting up national insurance contributions would be.
And I'm saying the budget's going to come at this time. We have to look at the whole budget as a whole. And I'm not going to comment until we see this budget as a whole. And more broadly, I have a lot of faith in this government. £63 billion of investment we're getting in. The investment in clean energy to get bills down for the future. We are seeing decisions today that are paying forward. And indeed, we've seen a lot of businesses come to this country today on Monday saying we are going to invest because they have faith in this government.
But with respect, you come on this programme to answer listeners' questions. You don't come on this programme to be a propagandist for the Labour government.
And I'm part of the Labour Party, though, right?
No, I'm a Labour MP. I get that. But you are actually allowed an opinion.
I am here, but I'm also offering an opinion not just of myself, but I was elected as a Labour Member of Parliament. I was not merely elected as an individual, right? I was elected as part of a Labour team. I'm proud to be part of this Labour team. This Labour team makes decisions collectively and we take responsibility for them collectively.
Okay, Andrea?
Well, you don't, because that's not how it works. Backbenchers don't get a decision in it. And the fact that you, I understand,
it does for us, by the
claim
way,
to have been involved in writing your party's manifesto.
I don't think I claim that, no.
OK, well, that's interesting, because certainly Labour's manifesto said that it would not put up national insurance. And now to hear Labour saying, oh, well, we only meant employees' national insurance. I mean, national insurance is national insurance. So that is an absolute clear break. If Labour go ahead with it, it is a clear break of a manifesto promise, and that is something any backbencher should be extremely concerned about. I mean, I completely think it's a given. If you tax jobs, you lose jobs.
But your government did that.
Well, absolutely, because post-COVID, during COVID, the furlough scheme, the bounce back loans, the coronavirus business loans, all of those things cost our economy 410 billion quid. Closely followed by Putin's invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, but why would you then
crisis.
use as one of the first levers to put up employers' national insurance? Because that, if you want to help the economy recover after COVID, when everyone thought that unemployment would massively increase, now it didn't in the end, but everyone thought it would. Why would you do that?
Well, because I think at the time our economy was recovering very fast because we had our own vaccine, because we were no longer in the EU, and our economy was actually doing very well, and even the ONS rewrote our performance post-COVID to demonstrate that our economy was performing strongly. So actually at that time the economy was growing. We had the lowest unemployment since the early 1970s. Wages were rising significantly, and what the government needed to do was to sort out our debt and deficit, and that's what they were seeking to do, was to not allow it to become overburdened. Conditions have completely changed.
That is true, but you can't sit there and say, well, we put it up, but it's hypocritical if you do, just on the manifesto.
No, Iain, what I'm saying is Labour clearly said in their manifesto, which only was a few months ago, that they would not put up national insurance or income tax. They didn't say, except that we might put up employers' national insurance. They clearly said national insurance. And, as if lying to the public wasn't enough, also, the economic backdrop is now very different to the scenario post-COVID, where they've been talking down the economy ever since they came into office, saying there's a £22 billion black hole, the economy is destroyed, it's all gone terribly wrong, we're going to have to fix it. They have been comprehensively talking it down. The Institute of Directors' own business investment survey showed that they've gone from plus 24 in July to minus 6, the lowest point since before the COVID pandemic.
I need to go to Luke because we're running out of time. Luke?
Well, I did have a point to make, but I just want to say, you came on this panel as a Labour MP and as someone who is a Treasury official. We have someone who employs here people saying that it will affect creating jobs and employing people. Surely you can answer that point.
But the point more broadly is, again, we have a budget that's coming out, and I wouldn't be commenting on budget measures before they end up.
We're not asking you to. We're asking you to
But we are
answer this
talking about possible budget measures, and budget measures are going to be announced by the Chancellor in less than a month's time.
The pound's not going to move up or down based on what's said on this panel. You can answer that question.
But it's more about the fact, it's not about the pound moving up and down. I don't think I have that power, right? But it is about the fact, like I say, we are a united Labour team. We have come into government at a very serious and difficult time. The worst inheritance since 1945, the second slowest growth in the G7 since COVID, the worst squeeze in wages since Napoleon. A huge amount that we have to fix. And to fix it, first of all, need stable government, which, by the way, is already paying off with that £63 billion coming in. But more broadly, stability in the government means as being a united team, and you do not have a situation.
Well, you keep saying about a united team. You're not united on the winter fuel allowance.
I can't comment for my colleagues. I can say what I do at your time. No,
I mean, seriously, if you can't comment, what is the point of being here if you can't comment on things?
But what I'm saying is I can't comment those people who did not follow the line, right? I understood the part what I got led to this manifesto, and I got led to support this government. That's absolutely what I am here to do, right? So more broadly, I can't, for those people who...
No, you're there to represent your constituents.
As well as my constituent. But my constituents elected me as a Labour MP as well as myself, right? They didn't just elect, Jeevun Sandher on paper.
But they also elect you as an MP to have a brain who can be independent-minded and point out when you think maybe, just maybe, the government might have got something wrong.
And those are conversations we take internally as a team, but we don't do externally.
It's not government policy yet. You're not going to lose the whip for saying it. He's making a very straightforward point. I really think that you should be able to answer
hoping
this.
that people will think about this carefully. Yeah.
Oh, look, I'm not an economist and I'm not a business person. The thing I do think that about this is, do you see the Conker story today? The Conker scandal.
No.
This guy's got a fake Conker and smashed open other Conkers. Someone was interviewed in LBC earlier and they said, look, it might not be within the rule. It might not be breaking the rules, but it's not in the spirit of it. And I feel like this is very much in the spirit of breaking a manifesto pledge.
I'll have you know, I was a championship Conker fighter at my primary school. It's one of my few claims to fame. Right, we'll move on to other questions in a moment. Jamie, thank you for that one. It's 8:33 News Headlines with Daryl Jackson.
The US has threatened to cut weapons funding to Israel unless it boosts humanitarian aid into Gaza. The Biden administration's given Israel 30 days to improve the situation there. The Old Baileys heard how 10-year-old Sarah Sharif wore a hijab to hide facial injuries she suffered in the years prior to her death. 3 members of her family, including her father, deny her murder in Woking in Surrey in August last year. A second police force has begun investigating allegations of sexual offences against Mohammed Al-Fayed. Surrey police have contacted victims who claimed in a TV documentary to have been assaulted at his home in Oxted. LBC weather: rain developing across western and northern areas tonight will be heavy at times. Drier in the southeast with the odd shower and a low of 8 degrees.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:36 on LBC. Businessman James Reed is with us. Dame Andrea Leadsom, Dr. Jeevun Sandher and Luke McGee, journalist who specialises in basically all things security and foreign. Are you close to all the security services, things like that?
Couldn't say.
Yeah, exactly. I knew the answer. Chris is in Richmond. Hello, Chris.
Evening panel. Who should the Labour Party be more concerned about as Tory leader, Kemi or Robert?
Well, Jeevun.
Oh, well, I think, that, as I said before, they're both kind of equal for me. I think they haven't made great decisions about their leaders in the past couple of years. I think it's going to be different. They haven't spent this leadership campaign talking about the cost of living crisis or the NHS or the education or the roads or the things that really matter to people. They go on to quite niche topics that aren't where the public is. Now, we had to learn, after losing quite a few elections, frankly, that you have to change your party to address the public's concerns. I think either these two are going to do that. It doesn't look like the leadership campaign has gone. So, I mean, either, basically. Much for muchness.
Which one of those two do you think would perform better at PMQs, which I get is not necessarily the primary requisite for being an opposition leader, but it does help?
They're different styles, right? So I think Jenner could be more normal in one sense. Kemi would be more unorthodox. But unorthodox, while it can surprise you, can also take you some really strange directions. So, you know, it would be more surprising because you wouldn't know what she's going to ask questions on in a particular week, I suspect. So I don't really know which one to play off more. I suppose Jenner could be the safer choice for PMQs.
Luke?
Without question, Badenoch. I think when you look at Robert Jenrick, you just cannot imagine him being Prime Minister, which I think is the main thing.
Why not?
I don't think he answers questions very well. I think he has moved on positions and looks very unconvincing, whereas she is, at the very least, whatever you want to say about her, seems fairly consistent. I think she's a very good performer at the dispatch box. And I think inevitability is a really sort of, or the idea of something being possible is a really powerful thing in politics. So much as it was with Jeremy Corbyn, you looked at him and you just went, nah. I think when you look at Jenrick, you probably think the same thing, whereas I could see Kemi winning a general election.
OK. James?
Well, it's an interesting moment, isn't it? It's like choosing a new CEO. I don't know either of them. I've never met them. I've just seen, like most people, a few snippets on TV. And Kemi Badenoch is the one I've taken more notice of as a viewer. I think she comes over with more energy and more charisma. And I think that's what you want in a leader, energy and charisma to start with. I don't know what's going on inside her head. I don't know what she's going to be like for ideas.
She seems more authentic as well.
Yeah, I think, well, that's... Yeah. I feel what you see is what you get. She makes mistakes, but we all do. I like listening to her. I think she's going to say interesting things. And I think the opposition really needs ideas. They need fresh thinking. They need to come at it with a new approach. And I think it would really draw a line. This is a fresh new start. And I think that could be quite exciting for the Conservatives.
Andrea, I was in Graham Brady's constituency in Altrincham on Friday, and I did a straw poll of the members there. There was about 70 there. And 3 people put their hand up for Robert Jenrick, and over 50 put their hands up for Kemi. Obviously, some were undecided. Now, I've got no idea of how representative that is. I don't know if you've taken soundings in your old association, but to answer the question, who should Labour fear most?
Well, as I've said, I'm not going to declare for either candidate because I decided I was going to sit this one out. But I do agree with both Luke and James that Kemi will be much more noticeable and noteworthy at the dispatch box and will be much harder for Starmer to deal with. Potentially, some of the qualities that the leader of the opposition also needs is to make the team work much, much better, because you can't be all things yourself. And I think, as a number of leaders in recent years have discovered, if you go it alone and don't consult with anyone, you don't stay leader for very long. So I think it would be very important to be a good people person within the team. And as has been said, you do need to generate new ideas. You've got to come up with a new appeal to the country. And so which of those two would be able to do that better is a big question. But I certainly agree that Kemi will be more eye-catching.
I don't understand why you're being so coy, because nobody's asking you to play a role in the leadership
No, I
contest.
know.
Just to a bit like Jeevun, I'm asking you for your opinion.
Yeah, sure. And I get that. And what I have said privately is that very rarely does a new leader of the opposition make it as far as the next general election on the Conservative benches. And we've had some great people who never made it to a general election. And so I don't want to jinx anyone or to just come out and say, I prefer this person. I've sort of said what I'm going to say, which is I think Kemi will be more eye-catching.
But as Penny Mordaunt's former campaign manager, she was in it. Obviously, she can't be because she lost her seat. But I don't think you'd be so reticent.
Yeah.
Then,
I mean, what I will say is I so wish we hadn't had a general election when we did. I think if we were having a general election in November, it would have been a much smaller Labour majority, and it would have been a much better democratic result for the country. I certainly think that annihilating my party the way it's been annihilated, and not by a huge popular mandate for Labour, because of course they only got 3% of the vote.
No, 34%.
And less than 30. Sorry,
you said 3%.
Sorry, that was a complete
wishful
misspeak.
thinking.
Sorry, 33.7% of the vote and less than 60% turnout, and really that isn't a huge vote of confidence in Labour, but what that has resulted in, because of the absolutely justifiable, completely take it on the chin, the performance of the Conservatives. People were sick of the Conservatives, so instead they voted for reform, for the Greens, for the Lib Dems, and that was what created this extraordinary landslide for Labour. And in my view, that is not good for the country. It puts too much power into the hands of people who've already shown themselves to be, virtue signalling. We take free clothes and free glasses and free stuff, but because we're good people, because we're Labour, it doesn't really matter. And that sucks. I mean, look at Sue Gray. I mean, the whole thing just sucks. Early on, if that was Conservatives, there would be much more of a hue and cry about it.
Well, we had 47 days of this. Trust me, saw that got us. In terms of where this government is, it has to fix a huge mess. In terms of popular mandate, I'm going to come back to that first and foremost. There's no division in terms of the popular vote of this percentage, that percentage. There is a division in this country of who wins the most seats. And at the last election, the people of this country voted tactically, very smartly, to ensure that your party lost a lot of seats. The worst result, I think,
God, you've agreed with each other. It's marvellous.
No, I've already said that, so that's not rocket science.
And also then we ended up with a huge majority and a huge mandate for change of things. We are doing so.
No, by default.
Well, that's what winning elections.
33% of the vote.
Andrea, there's no line at like 35 or 36%, right? The line is majority seats. A lot of majority seats. The majority seats is what matters in the House of Commons. What matters is who has the most seats. We have a very large majority and a very large mandate for change. We won the election. That's it.
We're
now here to do a mandate for change. And by the way, we're enacting what is in our manifesto. We've already started planning reform to build infrastructure for growth. Andrea, you have to let me finish. Andrea, it's rude to interrupt people. Please let me finish my sentence.
Sorry, yes.
We're building infrastructure for growth. We're building clean energy. We're restoring our NHS. We're hiring teachers. A huge amount that I'm proud this government will do. And by the way, a huge amount of pre-manifesto. Andrew, we spoke about the interrupting before, please.
No, we're
doing those things before, right? These things we're enacting, this country we're about to change. I'm really proud to be here. It's really long been in opposition, 14 years. We now have a chance to change this nation.
OK. Right. We have a very important subject to get to in just a couple of minutes' time. It's coming up to 8:45.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
8:47. James Reed, Andrea Leadsom, Jeevun, Sandher and Luke McGee answering your questions. Here's a text question from Scott in West Hampstead. The Biden administration has today given Israel a 30-day ultimatum to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza or face an arms embargo. Should Biden not have issued this stark ultimatum months ago? And should Britain now issue its own ultimatum to Prime Minister Netanyahu? Now, just a bit of background to this. The US government has demanded that at least 350 trucks of aid enter Gaza every day, and that a fifth border crossing is opened within the next 30 days. Meanwhile, the previous Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, has said he was planning to impose sanctions on 2 extremist ministers within the Israeli government prior to our general election, the Finance and National Security Ministers in Tel Aviv. And you can hear David Cameron speaking with Nick Ferrari tomorrow morning from 7 on LBC. Luke, let's come to you first. This is kind of your area of speciality, isn't it? I mean, strong words from the Biden administration today, but Scott is suggesting that should have happened some time ago.
I think it certainly could have been helpful if it had come sooner. I think one of the things when you speak to people in the diplomatic world, people in the defence world, the thing they all say about the conflict we're currently seeing is that it's what they'd feared for a very long time, and that doesn't mean escalation since October the 7th. It's for a decade. You've seen the major Western powers really lose influence in this region. You've also seen power brokers it's not obvious who a power broker is now. So really, the voice of the US is the single most important thing in this. And in terms of what Britain should do, I would strongly suggest that they go along in line with what the US is doing. I think the danger here is that there's an idea, especially in foreign policy world, that the only way you can have a stable and strong foreign policy is by having very strong domestic politics, because it's the only way your position sticks. And the obvious follow-up to this is, if the US administration under Biden starts going harder now, what happens if Donald Trump wins the presidential election?
Andrea Leadsom.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a horrific situation because, my heart goes out to Israel with that appalling attack on October the 7th. And as Luke rightly points out, for a decade, Israel have feared for their security. There's been this sort of skirmishing for so long. And then suddenly there was that horrifying attack. Israel couldn't do nothing. And yet it does now very much seem as if it goes too far. And notwithstanding the fact that Hamas are clearly choosing to hide people and material within the domestic, the innocent civilian population, in spite of that fact, there is still a point where you cannot simply deny humanitarian aid. So, yes, I conclude, yes, we do need to absolutely stand shoulder to shoulder with the United States and also share the concern about the US election, which is, after all, only 3 weeks away.
And I would just say on the point that people say, what can Britain do? What can Britain really do? And I'd, in fact, point to your former boss, Theresa May, when Donald Trump became president, was very, very good in strong-arming him into supporting NATO very early on. So it is possible Britain can have influence. It's just we need to know where that influence is and how we use it.
But the fact is, nobody seems to have any influence over the Israeli Prime Minister. And even those of us who have supported Israel all along, and I get the feeling you're on the same lines here, you think, well, they don't have to make it difficult for their allies to support what they're doing. When yesterday we had a question about effectively starving the population of northern Gaza because no food has been allowed in for, I think, 3 weeks. I can't justify that. You can't justify that. And, I mean, Netanyahu doesn't even address it. So it's no small wonder, I suppose, that Joe Biden has got involved. Jeevun, how do you see this?
Well, we have to have aid flow in immediately. Obviously, everyone in this panel would agree we want to see an immediate ceasefire, the release of hostages. We absolutely work towards it. I'm not going to comment specifics because obviously the Foreign Office will have the position of the Foreign Secretary, but we absolutely see aid go in there. I think the loss of life is intolerable. I don't think anyone could look at their screens and fail to be moved in a really deep and meaningful way. Peace in the region is what we want to see, and a two-state solution at the end of it. But unfortunately, it does seem at the moment quite far away. Despite that, I am hopeful we can get there. I am hopeful we can move forward. And I hope that that's where we end up in the end.
But do you think that Britain should effectively emulate what the Biden administration has done here. Is that something you would try and persuade the Foreign Secretary to do?
I think it's incredibly complicated, the foreign policy, right? And I just think I'm on a radio show and I'm not going to try and pass that all out. I would say that whatever we can do to kind of help bring about peace would be great. And if this is one mechanism, then my way should be considered. But I wouldn't push for a particular action, or like I say more broadly that's what we should be trying to get to.
But sometimes you have to have ultimatums to persuade somebody to take something seriously. And I think that's where the Biden administration have got to.
Yeah.
And it would seem a little odd if we, as America's closest ally, didn't follow suit.
Yeah, and I've only seen this now, and I'm assuming that...
Well, me too.
Yeah, so I'm assuming the Foreign Secretary will come out and say what we think the right thing is and why that is. There could be a huge amount of factors here that we aren't considering, they don't know about. This is the first time I've seen this as well.
OK, James.
Well, it's really disturbing what's happening in Gaza and supporting the poor people, children, families that are being affected in any way we can, humanitarianly, I think is an important thing to do. And if that's possible with the Americans, then that's a good thing.
Luke, looking at this, hopefully objectively, all Western countries seem to be able to do is call for an immediate ceasefire and call for a two-state solution, neither of which are on the table, neither of which are going to be on the table for a very long time. Is there nothing else that Western countries can do to influence what's going on?
I think coming back to having a united policy that's backed by the US and is a bipartisan position backed in the US is the only real way that you can have any influence. And I think it is possible to have influence. If suddenly it was the case that no matter what the next administration was, no matter who it was made up with, the US had a stable, reliable, predictable position, then it would force Netanyahu into having to take it slightly more seriously. So, yes, I think that is possible. Talking about two-state solution, the closest we got to that was 1993, and we're a long way from that now. Who's the Bill Clinton or the Yitzhak Rabin of today? So,
right, let's move on to Malcolm in Wigan. Malcolm, what's your question, please?
My question is, in the case of assisted dying or assisted suicide, as some people are describing it, would the panel feel comfortable about the risk of medical misdiagnosis in the case of 6 months, taking into account the fact that Stephen Jay Gould, a top American scientist, was given a life expectancy of 8 months and actually lived in 1982 from terminal cancer and actually lived for 20 years after? Are they happy with that use of the dubious phrase 6 months life expectancy? And are they in favour of medically assisted suicide?
Well, palliative experts have warned today that it is impossible to accurately predict life expectancy and say they fear that if Labour MP Kim Leadbeater's parliamentary bill were to become law, then people who might have lived for a further 3 or more years could end up ending their lives. This is a difficult one. We've only got about 45 seconds to a minute for each of you to answer this, which you may be grateful for or not, I don't know. James, let's come to you first.
It's a very difficult one. I suppose if people are in great pain and they've got a terminal condition and it's very obvious that they don't have much time left and they'd like to take this route, I think that's an option that we should consider making available for them.
But this 6-month limit has been, it's a big part of it, isn't it? And, as the caller says, you can't accurately predict it. You can't say, well, this person will die on such and such date. No, you can't.
So I'm not sure how relevant that is.
Is misdiagnosis a real risk here?
Well, yes.
Luke?
Of course it's a risk. I don't really know how... that's the case with all medicine, of course. But, I won't go into too much detail about it because I'm sure they wouldn't want me to say it, but I do know of someone who was so ill as a result of something that happened in the pandemic that they told their family that was that would have been their preferred outcome. So I think when someone says something like that to you, it's incredibly emotive.
Jeevun?
Yeah, I'm a supporter of this bill. To be clear, the 6 months about choice at the end of life. So it's actually having a safeguard there saying, look, if a doctor says we think you have 6 months left to live, then actually you have the choice to end your life and end the unbearable suffering. This is about the dignity and beauty of life that I absolutely support. No one wants to see people suffer towards the end. It's about having those safeguards. So they say only those who the doctor thinks it's less than 6 months to live, 2 doctors signing on a legal framework, and then someone to take it under their own steam. So it's not the case of, a clock ticking. It's a case of you have this option available to you as an individual if you want it, given the fact that you feel the end is coming near. It's really about having the choice at the end of life and knowing that you're not going to have to go through unbearable suffering. I've heard a huge amount. I've seen people die towards the end in a huge amount of suffering. It's something that is the right thing to do. It's where the public is with 3/4 supporting it.
Andrea, is this an issue where you're sort of quite grateful that you're not an MP anymore, so you don't have to, because it's a really difficult one to decide, isn't it? It is a conscience issue.
It is a conscience issue. I've always been very clear I don't support assisted dying, and the reason is partly because in the countries who've introduced it, it's a thin end of the wedge thing. This 6 months thing becomes, well, you're not in unbearable pain, but you're really unhappy, or your family don't like you because they want to inherit your money. And actually, it was a constituent of mine who about 13 years ago called me round. She had motor neurone disease. She said, I absolutely love reading, but I can't do anything. And my family would love to get their hands on my money. And if assisted dying was in place, I'm sure they'd find a way. And I was like, wow. So I think it is a thin end of the wedge thing, and I absolutely wouldn't support it. However, the law is quite clear. If you do help someone to die, there are 2 tests. One is, did you commit a crime? And the answer is yes. The other is there a public interest in prosecuting you? And very often, where it is genuinely the case that someone was in agony and at the end of their life, there is no prosecution. So I've always felt that the law is in a good place right now.
Okay. Right, well, I'm sure we'll be returning to that one regularly over the course of the next few weeks. Now, our fun question from Steve in Manchester. Which actor would play you in a movie about your life? Donald Trump is, of course, being played by Sebastian Stan, whoever he is, in the new biopic. Should I have heard of him? In the new biopic, The Apprentice. Luke, who would play you?
Purely on the basis that I think he'd give it the heft it deserved would be Sir Anthony Hopkins.
You're about half his age.
I don't care. I think he's the best actor of all time.
James Reed?
I like Tom Hardy. I liked him in Peaky Blinders, and people say I look a bit like him sometimes, so I'd go for him.
I never saw Peaky Blinders, so I don't know. Andrea?
Oh, well, someone did play me once in something on Brexit, and I can't remember who it was. I don't think I even watched it. But I would choose probably someone like Helen Mirren, because she's like a good actress and a bit tiny
He's also
bit
got
like
20 years on you.
Yeah, but that's fine.
Or is it you've got 20 years on her? I'm not sure which way round that is, but she's a lot older than you.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, but that's cool.
Okay.
I don't mind that. I'm quite 61 and proud of being 61, actually. Taken my tax-free pension before Labour get their hands on it.
Yes, I've been wondering whether to do that.
Do it,
Jeevun?
seriously.
The only one I can think of is Dev Patel. I'm not sure else that would actually be available.
How old's he now? Because I just think of him as like
I'd like to say we're about the
16.
same
And that's, what was that film he was in first
brilliant,
of all?
that film, wasn't it? What was it? The one.
We're not doing great here, guys.
The one that made him famous.
Yeah.
Based in India.
Yeah.
Lion.
No,
Lost on a Train.
The first one.
No. Anyway.
Brilliant.
The Slumdog Millionaire.
Yeah,
Thanks,
exactly.
Corey, rescuing us there.
Well done,
Anyway,
Corey.
let's move on quickly. I can see that. Vaguely.
Yeah.
He's a much more better-looking guy than I am.
I'm not.
Which is quite nice for me.
Of course he's not. Of
He
course
is.
he's
There
not.
we go, he is.
Anyway,
I wouldn't go with much
right. On to, have I redeemed myself for being so nasty to you now?
Oh, you've been great, don't worry about it.
Right, on tomorrow's panel, we have the Conservative Shadow Cabinet Minister, Dame Harriet Baldwin, Labour MP Lucy Rigby, the former Boris Johnson advisor Henry Newman, and the journalist and China expert Isabel Hilton. So they'll be here from 8 o'clock tomorrow. Coming up in the next hour, what are we doing? We're going to be talking about Al Pacino, something I never thought I'd say on LBC. Why are we talking about Al Pacino? Because he says it's fun to be a new dad at the age of 84. Now, there's nothing wrong with being an older parent, but shouldn't there be limits to this at 84? He says he hopes that his child will know all about him. Well, I suppose the child will in the end because he's a very famous actor. But how responsible is it to have a child at the age of 84? But more generally, what's it like to be a much older parent? And is it something that you come to regret or think, no, why shouldn't I? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the US has told Israel it must improve humanitarian aid to Gaza within 30 days or risk its